The Invincible Armada. The Galactic Coalition had ruled the stars for thousands of years, crushing every enemy that dared to resist them. Their war fleets were unmatched, their technology far beyond anything most species could comprehend, and their armies had never known defeat. When the High Command looked at Earth, they saw nothing but a primitive planet inhabited by an insignificant species. The coalition leaders scoffed at the idea that humans could pose any real challenge. Admiral Xyra of the Zorvax Dominion stood on the bridge of the battleship Void Reaver, watching the massive fleet assembled before him. 500 warships, each armed with enough firepower to destroy entire planets, floated in perfect formation. The fleet had been gathered to make an example of Earth, to show the galaxy that the Coalition's rule was absolute. The mission was simple. Enter the Sol system, demand Earth's surrender, and if the humans refused, annihilate their planet. The Coalition had done this before to countless civilizations, and it had always ended the same way, with fire raining from the skies and resistance crushed in a matter of days. As the fleet activated its warp drives and jumped toward Earth, the officers and soldiers aboard the ships felt no fear. Why would they? They were the mightiest force in the galaxy, and Earth was just another weak, stubborn world that needed to be taught a lesson. But something was different this time. The moment they exited warp and approached the outer edge of the Sol system, an eerie silence settled over the fleet. There was no resistance, no planetary defense systems firing at them, no human ships scrambling to intercept them. The vastness of space stretched before them, quiet and empty. A junior officer on the Void Reaper frowned at his display. "Admiral, we are not detecting any human warships in the area," he reported. "No defenses, no orbital stations. It's almost like they don't even know we're here." Xyra smirked. "Foolish creatures. They must be hiding on their planet, waiting for our arrival." He gave the order for the fleet to move forward, deeper into the system. One by one, the warships glided into formation, their weapons charged and ready. Earth would see them coming, and when the humans realized they had no hope, they would beg for mercy. And yet, something felt wrong. The tension on the bridge grew as they neared Mars. Long-range scans detected nothing unusual. The human colonies on Mars were abandoned, as if they had been evacuated long before the fleet arrived. No distress signals, no signs of life. Just an empty planet. Then, without warning, the Void Reaper's communication officer gasped. "Admiral, I don't understand. We just lost contact with 3 of our ships." Xyra turned sharply. "Lost contact? How?" The officer frantically tapped on his console. "Unknown, sir. One moment they were there, and the next, nothing. No explosion, no debris. It's like they vanished." A cold chill ran down Xyra's spine. Coalition ships didn't just disappear. "Scan the area," he commanded. "I want answers." The scanners found nothing. No enemy ships. No signs of battle. The 3 missing ships were simply gone. The fleet pressed on, approaching Earth's orbit, but as they neared the blue planet, more ships began to vanish, one by one. Entire warships simply ceased to exist. The Coalition officers panicked, desperately trying to explain what was happening, but there were no answers. The Void Reaper's sensors suddenly detected a massive energy surge from Earth's surface, but before the crew could react, darkness engulfed them. And then, silence. The mighty fleet that had once been the pride of the Galactic Coalition was no more. Earth remained untouched. The humans had not fired a single shot. And yet, the Invincible Armada had vanished into nothingness. Admiral Xyra awoke to complete darkness. The familiar hum of the Void Reaper's engines was gone. The glow of control panels, the chatter of officers, everything had disappeared. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something he had never known before. Fear. He pressed a command on his wrist console, activating his emergency visor. A faint red glow illuminated the bridge, revealing a sight that sent ice through his veins. His crew was frozen in place, standing, sitting, mid-motion, like statues. Their eyes were open, yet lifeless. Thyra tried to move, but his limbs felt sluggish, as if something unseen was pressing against him. The air was heavy, thick with something he couldn't define. He forced himself to take a step forward, reaching for his second-in-command, Captain Zorvix. He shook the officer's shoulder. No response. Zorvix remained still, eyes staring blankly ahead. Panic clawed at the edges of Thyra's mind. He was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, an admiral of the Coalition's most advanced fleet. And yet, in this moment, he felt utterly powerless. Then, without warning, his console crackled to life. A whispering voice, deep and inhuman, slithered through the air. "You were warned." Thyra's blood turned to ice. "Who's there? Identify yourself," he barked, trying to keep his voice steady. The voice chuckled, low, amused, ancient. "You came to take what is not yours. And now, you are ours." The red glow of his visor flickered. Shadows twisted around him, forming figures, tall, humanoid, their eyes glowing like distant stars. Their forms pulsed, shifting in and out of existence. They weren't human, but they weren't entirely alien either. They were something else. A memory surfaced in Thyra's mind, one he had dismissed as foolish myths told by the older warlords of the Coalition. Stories of a race that once ruled the stars, long before the rise of the Galactic Coalition. A species so powerful, so advanced, that they simply disappeared one day, leaving behind only ruins and whispers. The precursors. Impossible. They were supposed to be extinct. Thyra clenched his fists. "This is some kind of trick. We are the Coalition. No force in the galaxy can stand against us. You are nothing." The bridge of the Void Reaper shattered. Reality itself cracked like glass, and suddenly, Thyra was falling, plummeting through endless darkness. He saw glimpses of his fleet, scattered across an unknown dimension, warships floating in an abyss where time had no meaning. He saw his soldiers screaming silently, their faces twisted in terror as invisible forces pulled them apart, piece by piece. And then, silence. Thyra found himself standing once more, but not aboard his ship. He was in a vast chamber, impossibly large, stretching into infinity. Towering monoliths lined the space, covered in glowing symbols that flickered like dying stars. A single figure stood before him. Not a shadow, not a human. Something beyond comprehension. "You were warned," the entity said again. Thyra fell to his knees. For the first time in his life, he realized the truth. The Coalition had never been the rulers of the galaxy. They had merely been allowed to exist. And now, they had trespassed into a realm where gods had once walked. Earth was never theirs to conquer. It never had been. Admiral Thyra had faced many horrors in his lifetime. He had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, and burned civilizations to ashes. But this was something beyond war, beyond logic. He was still in the vast chamber, surrounded by towering monoliths covered in strange, shifting symbols. The presence before him stood motionless, its form flickering like a mirage, as if reality itself struggled to contain it. "Your kind does not belong here." The voice wasn't spoken, it was felt. It echoed in Thyra's mind, in his bones, in the very core of his being. His instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. Summoning every ounce of his will, he forced himself to stand. "Where is my fleet?" he demanded. "What have you done?" The entity remained silent for a long moment. Then, with a single motion of its hand, the void cracked open. A window into space appeared before Thyra, showing the wreckage of his once mighty armada. Hundreds of warships drifted lifelessly. Some were torn apart, as if an invisible force had crushed them. Others were simply empty. No crew, no bodies, no signs of life. The pride of the Galactic Coalition, erased without a single battle. Thyra's fists clenched, "This is impossible. You thought yourselves gods," the entity said. "But you are nothing more than children, playing with fire you do not understand." Zyra's heart pounded in his chest. He had studied Earth's history before launching this invasion. Humans were primitive, chaotic, barely a threat to the Coalition's forces. But something was wrong. Something had always been wrong. "How?" he whispered. "What are you?" The entity stepped closer. The temperature in the chamber dropped. The lights dimmed. "We are the ones who remained." Zyra frowned. "The ones who remained. You thought Earth was weak. You thought it was a world of primitives. But Earth was never just a planet." Zyra's mind raced. Stories of human resilience had always been dismissed by the Coalition. The tales of their wars, their ability to survive in impossible conditions, their refusal to surrender. But this wasn't just resilience. This was something else. You assumed humanity was alone. You were wrong. The chamber trembled. The monoliths glowed brighter. The walls shifted, revealing faces, thousands of them, watching, waiting. They weren't human. They weren't alien. They were something in between. The remnants of a long-forgotten race, a species that had once ruled the stars. The true rulers of Earth. Zyra staggered backward. His mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. "Impossible," he whispered. "The humans, they weren't the ones who destroyed my fleet, were they?" The entity gave no answer, but the silence spoke volumes. Zyra's arrogance had blinded him. The Coalition had assumed that Earth was just another planet to conquer. They had never realized that Earth was protected, not by humans, but by something far, far older. And now, the reckoning had begun. Admiral Xera staggered back, his mind spinning as the entity's words echoed in his skull. "You assumed humanity was alone. You were wrong." The towering monoliths pulsed with an eerie glow, and the shifting symbols on their surfaces seemed to burn into his retinas. The faces, those countless, watching faces, remained motionless, their hollow eyes locked onto him. Xera clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe. He had seen death. He had led campaigns that wiped entire civilizations from existence. But this was something else entirely. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, keeping his voice steady. "If you are not human, then what are you?" The entity before him tilted its head slightly. "We are the keepers of the last gate, the remnants of those who came before." Zyra swallowed hard. "You mean a precursor race? Your kind gives us many names, but the truth is far simpler. We are the ones who remain." The chamber trembled, and Xera felt the weight of unseen forces pressing against him. This thing, whatever it was not bluffing. It had wiped out his fleet without a single shot being fired. It had pulled him from reality itself. He needed answers. He took another step. "The humans, you protect them." The humans were always meant to be tested, guided. Their fate is not yours to decide. Zyra's lips curled in frustration. They are a primitive species. Their ships are outdated, their technology inferior. The Galactic Coalition has ruled the stars for millennia. You think they are strong enough to challenge us? The entity did not move, did not blink. They did not need to challenge you. They only needed to endure. A flick of the entity's wrist, and suddenly, Zyra was somewhere else. A battlefield. But not in the present. The past. He stood on the charred remains of a world, surrounded by the wreckage of colossal warships. The air was thick with smoke. The ground was littered with bodies, both alien and human. Zyra turned, his boots crunching against ash and bone. He knew this battle. It was from the ancient wars, long before the Coalition had formed. The war against the first great enemy of the galaxy. A war that had nearly ended all life. And yet, human soldiers stood among the fallen, bloodied, bruised, but still standing. Zyra's breath caught in his throat. No, this is not possible. Humanity wasn't part of the ancient wars. The entity's voice was quiet but firm. They were always here. You simply refused to see them. Zyra turned again, and suddenly the battlefield was Earth. Ruins of its greatest cities lay in flames. Alien warships hovered above, raining fire down upon the planet. And yet, the humans fought back. Not with advanced technology, not with superior numbers, but with sheer, unrelenting defiance. For every fleet that came, they'd rebuild. For every city that burned, they reclaimed the land. The coalition had always dismissed humans as weak, as fragile creatures who had barely begun to explore the stars. But they had missed something important. Humans did not conquer. They endured. Your coalition thought itself invincible. But true strength is not measured in power. It is measured in what remains after the fire has passed. Zyra clenched his jaw. You expect me to believe that these creatures, these humans, were never truly weak. The entity stepped closer, and suddenly Zyra was back in the monolith chamber. Look for yourself. The walls of the chamber shimmered, and Zyra saw Earth, but not as he had seen it before. Beneath its surface, something ancient stirred. Structures, hidden beneath the oceans and mountains. Energy readings far beyond anything the coalition had ever encountered. Weapons, sleeping for eons. Earth had been a battlefield for far longer than the coalition had existed, and something had survived. Your kind is arrogant, the entity said. You assumed Earth was another world to conquer, but Earth is not a world. It is a crucible, and only the worthy survive. Zyra felt his breath catch. If this was true, if Earth had been tested before, then what did that mean for the fate of his fleet? What did you do to them? He whispered. For the first time, the entity smiled. We let them see what awaits them beyond the veil. And they did the only thing they could do. Zyra's blood ran cold. What do you mean? They screamed. The chamber shook violently. The monoliths brightened. And suddenly, Zyra could hear them. The voices of his fleet, screaming, begging, breaking. Zyra fell to his knees. He had led thousands of soldiers into war. He had believed they were the strongest force in the galaxy. And now they were gone. The entity loomed over him. You are the last admiral. Tell your kind that Earth does not belong to them. The chamber erupted in light, and Zyra's world turned to darkness. Admiral Zyra gasped as he collapsed onto the cold metal floor of his command ship, his body drenched in sweat. His vision blurred, his lungs burned, and his hands trembled. He could still hear the distant echoes of screams, his fleet, his warriors, crying out in pure terror before they had vanished. He tried to stand, but his legs felt like they no longer belonged to him. His officers surrounded him, their voices frantic. Admiral, what happened? Sir, are you injured? The fleet. Where's the rest of the fleet? Zyra's breath hitched as he forced himself to look at the massive viewport before him. Only a handful of ships remained. Out of the thousands he had led to Earth's doorstep, only a few dozen still drifted in formation. The rest, gone, not destroyed, not in pieces, simply erased from existence. And yet the Earth remained below, untouched, unmoved. Its people continued their lives, unaware that one of the galaxy's most powerful armadas had just been swallowed whole by something beyond comprehension. Zyra's second-in-command, Commander Vekel, grabbed his shoulder. Sir, we lost nearly everything. Vekel's voice was laced with barely controlled panic. One moment, the fleet was holding formation. Then the scanners went blind. No explosions, no enemy fire. They were just taken. The single word barely escaped Zyra's lips. His mind still reeled from what he had witnessed. The shifting monoliths, the entity that had spoken to him, the truth he had been shown. Commander Vekel's grip tightened. Taken. By what? The humans don't have this kind of technology. There was no energy discharge, no gravitational anomalies, no sign of any weapon being used. This doesn't make any sense. Zyra's stomach twisted. He wished it didn't make sense. He wished he could convince himself that this was some kind of human trick, some hidden defense system he had failed to anticipate. But deep down, he knew the truth. It wasn't the humans. It was something else. Something older. Something far more terrifying. And worst of all, it was waiting. Zyra turned toward the nearest officer. "Have we received any transmissions from the missing ships?" The officer hesitated, his skin pale. "No, Admiral. No distress calls. No emergency beacons. Nothing. It's like they were never there." Zyra's pulse quickened. Even in battle, even when ships were destroyed, there was always something left behind. Wreckage, debris, lifeless bodies floating in the void. But this was complete erasure. And the whispers, he could still hear them. They screamed. A shudder ran down his spine. Vickel's voice cut through his thoughts. "Sir, what do we do? If the humans have a weapon capable of this, then we have to." Zyra shook his head. "It's not the humans." The room fell silent. Vickel frowned. Then what was it? Zyra clenched his fists. Something old. Something we were never meant to find. His voice lowered to a whisper. "We've made a mistake." A grave expression crossed Vickel's face. "Sir, if this is some kind of, we have to leave." Zyra snapped, his voice sharp and commanding. "Set a course back to Coalition space. Now." Vickel hesitated, eyes widening. "Admiral, we can't just. We are leaving." Zyra's voice boomed across the bridge. "That's an order." The remaining officers scrambled to comply. Alarms blared as the remnants of the fleet prepared for an emergency jump. Zyra's heart pounded as he stared at Earth one last time. The planet looked so peaceful, so normal. But he knew better. As the ship's engines roared to life, a sudden spike of energy flickered across the scanners. "Sir, we're detecting something," one of the officers shouted. Zyra turned, his body tensing. "What is it?" The officer's fingers trembled over the console. "I had to know. It's not a weapon, not a ship, not any known energy signature." Then the lights flickered. Every screen in the command center froze. And a voice. Asterisk, asterisk, that voice. Asterisk, asterisk, spoke again. "Run, little Admiral. Run fast." The ship lurched. Zyra's breath hitched as an invisible force crushed against the hull, pressing against the ship like a giant hand slowly closing around it. The entire bridge shook, officers gripping onto their stations as emergency lights flashed. "Sir, something's holding us back." The view outside twisted. The stars warped, stretching and bending, as if reality itself had been caught in a fist. They weren't just being stopped. They were being dragged back. Back toward Earth. "No," Zyra roared. "Overload the engines. We need full power, now." The ship shuddered violently as energy surged through the systems. The gravitational force intensified, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed like they would never escape. Then, suddenly, the pressure vanished. The ship snapped forward at incredible speed, breaking free of whatever had tried to hold it. Zyra collapsed into his chair, panting. The officers around him gasped in relief. Vickel turned, his face pale. "Sir, what the hell was that?" Zyra didn't answer. He was staring at the viewport, where Earth still floated in the distance, calm and unbothered. But now something else was there. A shadow, massive and unfathomable, barely visible against the backdrop of space. A shape that defied logic, its edges shifting as if it existed in multiple dimensions at once. And then it turned. Not physically, not in any way he could describe, but he felt it. It was looking at him. Zyra's stomach twisted into knots. "We have to go. Now." The remaining fleet did not hesitate. The emergency jump engines activated, and in a blink, they fled. As the stars streaked past, Zyra let out a slow, shaky breath. He had never run from a battle before, never abandoned a war. But this was not a war they could win. And the worst part, he knew, deep in his soul, that whatever was watching them from Earth's shadow had just let them escape. The fleet tore through space, streaking away from Earth faster than Syra had ever ordered a retreat before. The emergency jump engines strained under the stress, warning lights flashing across the bridge. But Syra didn't care. They had to get as far away as possible. He stood at the center of the command deck, his fingers gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly that his claws threatened to puncture the metal. His officers were frantically working at their stations, fear still lingering in their wide eyes. Commander Vickel was beside him, staring at the main viewport with a haunted expression. "Admiral, I don't understand. What just happened back there?" Vizera exhaled shakily. He didn't want to answer. He didn't want to think about what he had seen, what he had felt. That presence, that thing lurking near Earth, it had watched them. It had let them run. And that terrified him more than anything. "The rest of the fleet," Gyra muttered, ignoring Vickel's question. "We need to contact the main coalition forces. We have to warn them. They must never send another fleet to Earth." Vickel hesitated. "Sir, we sent thousands of ships to that system. If something took them, the High Command will want answers." Gyra turned his burning gaze toward his second-in-command. "They can demand answers all they want, but they must never send another fleet." Vickel looked unconvinced, but before he could speak, a frantic voice broke through the bridge. "Sir, we're picking up something." Gyra snapped his attention to the officer at the scanning station. "What is it?" The officer's face had gone pale. I don't know how to explain it, Admiral. We're receiving distorted transmissions, signals from our missing ships." A cold chill ran through Gyra. "Put them on the main screen," he ordered. The officer hesitated before pressing a sequence of buttons. The massive central screen flickered to life, but instead of a clear transmission, a nightmarish static-filled blur appeared. Shapes twisted in the distortion, flickering in and out like echoes of something that had once been real. And then, a voice. It was broken, fragmented, filled with an unearthly distortion. But Gyra recognized it. It was one of his captains. "Admiral, help. Don't understand." The voice crackled, stretching unnaturally, as if coming from a place it was never meant to escape from. Gyra leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Who is this? Where are you?" The voice wavered. Then another joined it. Then another. "Gone. All gone. Helpless. It's not death. It's worse. They are here, watching." Static overtook the voices, and then, for a brief moment, a single image flickered onto the screen. A battlefield of empty space, where the missing ships drifted in a lifeless graveyard. But they weren't wrecked. They weren't damaged. They were perfectly intact. Yet, something was wrong. A shadow coiled through the fleet, an unnatural blackness that seemed to consume the very fabric of reality itself. It wasn't a physical object. It wasn't something Gyra could describe. But it was there. And it moved. The image flickered violently, and suddenly, the screen went black. The bridge fell silent. No one breathed. No one spoke. Then the transmission returned, but this time, there were no words. Only a single horrifying sound. Laughter. Not human. Not alien. Something else. It was deep, hollow, mocking. Then, silence. Gyra's blood ran cold. The screen remained black. The static was gone. The signals had vanished. And with them, so had any last trace of the missing fleet. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, finally, Vickel broke the silence. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Admiral, what do we do?" Gyra took a slow, shaky breath. His mind raced, but no logical explanation surfaced. This was beyond war, beyond science, beyond anything the Coalition had ever faced. He turned toward his officers. His voice was firm. We do what we should have done from the beginning. He stood. We run. Vickel's eyes widened. Sir. Sira cut him off. We erase all records of what happened. We destroy every log, every report, every trace of our fleet's mission to Earth. No one must ever return there. Vickel hesitated. But the High Command, they don't need to know. Sira's voice was cold, unwavering. If they ask, we tell them Earth had unexpected defenses, that the mission was a failure, that we lost contact with the fleet and barely escaped with our lives. He turned toward the main screen, where only darkness remained. If they push for more, we tell them the truth. He exhaled. We tell them that something was waiting for us. The silence on the bridge was suffocating. Vickel swallowed hard. And if they don't believe us? Sira looked at him, his expression grim. Then they will learn the hard way. He turned toward the navigation officer. Plot a course for the nearest coalition outpost. Maximum speed. We're leaving this system, and we're never coming back. The officer hesitated only a moment before nodding and typing in the commands. As the ship's engines roared to life, and the remaining fleet prepared for their final jump, Kyra cast one last glance toward the viewport, toward Earth. The planet sat undisturbed in the void, its people completely unaware of what had just transpired. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching. As the fleet finally jumped to light speed, Sira let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had escaped. But deep in his heart, he knew the truth. They had only survived because it had allowed them to. And if the coalition ever made the mistake of returning, there would be no survivors. The fleet streaked through hyperspace, tearing away from the cursed system as fast as their engines could handle. Admiral Xera sat in his command chair, his claws digging into the metal armrests. His mind was a storm of questions, but there was one truth he couldn't deny. They had faced something beyond their understanding. The bridge was silent. Every officer was still shaken, their gazes locked on their instruments as if afraid to look up, afraid that whatever they had escaped from might somehow follow them even through the void. Vickel finally broke the silence. His voice was quiet, uncertain. Admiral, what do we tell the High Command? Xera exhaled, his jaw tightening. The truth. Vickel hesitated. Sir, if we tell them what really happened, they'll think we've lost our minds. They'll demand proof. And we have none. Xera's claws scraped against the chair's armrests. He knew Vickel was right. High Command would never believe them. The coalition had ruled for centuries with sheer military might. They did not believe in mysteries. They only believed in force. But force had meant nothing in that system. The most powerful fleet the coalition had ever sent had simply vanished. His fleet, the so-called survivors, had only lived because something had let them go. Xera turned his gaze toward the viewport, watching the swirling lights of hyperspace. He finally spoke, his voice cold and sharp. Then we make them believe. Vickel's brow furrowed. How? Xera stood. We tell them Earth is a dead end, that our fleet was wiped out by unknown defenses. We tell them that any ship sent there will meet the same fate. He turned to face his officers. We tell them that nothing comes back from Earth. The bridge remained silent, the weight of his words pressing down on every soul aboard. One of the younger officers, still shaken, muttered under his breath, Maybe we should warn the other species too. Xera's eyes snapped toward him. No. The officer looked startled. But sir, if the coalition doesn't listen, someone else might send ships there. They should know. Xera cut him off. No warnings. No messages. No one must ever know. Vickel frowned. Sir, with respect, why? If we could prevent another fleet from making the same mistake. Xera turned toward him, his eyes dark with something deeper than fear. Because, he said, his voice low, what if that's exactly what it wants? Vickel's mouth went dry. Xera stepped forward, his expression grim. What if this thing isn't a defense? What if it isn't just reacting to invaders? He let the words sink in before delivering his final thought. What if it's hunting? The silence that followed was absolute. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ship's systems, the distant vibration of the engines carrying them far away from the horror they had barely escaped. Finally, Vakel swallowed hard. Then we must ensure no one ever sends another fleet. Syra nodded. Exactly. The moment they reached the nearest outpost, Syra personally led the meeting with Coalition intelligence. He told them the story he knew they would believe. The fleet had encountered unexpected planetary defenses, powerful ones, the kind that could erase entire armies before they even had a chance to fight back. He made sure to look afraid. He made sure his officers looked afraid. The high command, proud and overconfident, could accept the idea of an enemy too strong to engage. But they could never accept the truth that something had simply taken their ships. The report was filed. The warning was sent. Earth was off limits. For now. But as Cyrus stared out the viewport of the station, watching his remaining ships being repaired, he knew it wouldn't last. Someone, someday, would ignore the warning. Someone would believe the coalition had simply been too weak. Someone would send another fleet. And when that happened, they would learn the truth. The way all the others had. The way Syra had. He just hoped, for their sake, that Earth would show them the same mercy it had shown him. But deep down, he knew the truth. It wouldn't.